For the most part, we are generally all held accountable for our actions, one way or another. May it be the physical repercussions that return to bite us on the arse, or our own mind plagued by the memory of things we've done. Do you think you could publicly confess your darkest secrets to the equivalent of a large room full of strangers? Maybe you could if you felt you could help somebody going through a similar situation. Or maybe you could as a means of purely venting, an equivalent of screaming from the rooftops, so to speak. I'm JJ, and here are 3 shocking true confessions from Reddit. Number 1. I tried to kill my father. Posted by Dill. I was 7 years old and I tried everything my inadequate mind could think of. I found a bunch of pills every now and then, and I'd crushed them into his drinks. I turned off his oxygen machine regularly while he was sleeping, and more things I don't want to admit. It was these little things compiled because it was the only solution in my head that would solve our problem. My dad would beat my mother every day, and he'd beat my siblings and I regularly, but not as often. She'd always scream and yell at us to call the police, which I only did twice before I learned my lesson. My sister never learned. Whenever we'd call the police, they'd come out and my mum would defend my dad, saying that they were just playing around and wrestling, and after the problem was gone, whoever called the police would get beat next. For the longest time, the reaction was always the same. We'd all start crying because we were kids and he'd yell at us to go into the bathroom. I only have one very clear memory of all this, of him beating her and then running to the bathroom with my siblings. The rest are blurs. After a while, whenever I heard my mother screaming for help, I learned to ignore it and just continue what I was doing. This was around the time I thought that I needed a plan to kill him. I was a child and I was stupid, but when you can't count on the police to help you, or even CPS, in the end you take matters in your own hands the best way you know how. Even now, the only regret I have is that none of it worked. This sorry excuse of a man had a cardiac arrest. The doctors said he was going to die and told my mum that we should all come in to say our goodbyes. They were all crying and I didn't understand it. They all went in to say goodbye while this dude was shitting himself in a hospital bed. I stayed home, not because I hated him, but because I just didn't care at the time. He flatlined apparently, but they brought him back and gave him 5 years to live if he kept up good health. It's been well over 5 years, and he hasn't been healthy in the slightest, and he's still here, alive and well. He doesn't beat us nearly as much, considering he isn't home as often, and he's gotten older. Last night, I was minding my own business in the kitchen, and he randomly told me that I'm going to hell, and it just went back and forth with him telling me that I need to respect him. I snapped and told him that I don't need to love or respect a little bitch who feels the need to beat women to feel strong. After this point, he walked over to me, so I already knew he was going to hit me if I said more smart-ass shit, but I couldn't stop myself. I continued with my shit, so he beat me, but it didn't hurt that bad. I'm honestly sick of the guy, and I can't wait for the day he actually dies. I don't know if that's normal, but being raised like this has obviously made me far from it. Number 2. I held my boyfriend at gunpoint over an 8-hour period. I wanted to pull the trigger. Posted by Susan. I was not in a good mental spot. It wasn't some big epic fight that started it. We had a disagreement and I flipped. I didn't black out. I was fully aware of my actions. We were in a happy relationship, at that point 3 years in. I woke up one day and we had a little argument over something I don't even remember now. He tried walking away to let me cool off and I lost it. I grabbed my gun, told him we were going to talk. I loaded it and held him at gunpoint in our bedroom for about 8 hours. I had never been violent before, no warning signs, etc. He talked me out of it, and instead of calling the police, he got me the help I needed through medical professionals. I was diagnosed with PTSD, social anxiety, and depression, possible stemming from the PTSD. He was there for me every step of the way, and the guilt I feel will never go away from my actions. Life could have gone such a different way if I pulled the trigger. This was 10 years ago, and we are married and have 2 beautiful children. Looking at us now, no one would imagine what happened. We never told anyone, and he stood by me at my darkest moment. Mental health problems are real. Instead of locking me away and running for the hills, he helped me when I needed it the most. The resulting life we are living together is more than I could ever have imagined. Number 3. I used to be in a controlling relationship. That's because I was the controlling one. Posted by CompThrowaway12. I've seen a lot of posts on Reddit of people who had been in abusive relationships and had gotten out of them. It always makes me happy to see this because it means that person got away from someone like me. And so I wanted to share my perspective of someone who was the abuser. Because we often like to think of ourselves as the hero of our own tale and not the villain of someone else's. I dated a girl, Gina, for a few years, and it became an abusive relationship only a couple of months in. I had been in another long-term relationship previously, only 1 year, in which I started to show controlling tendencies, but this was toward the end, and this first girl, Faye, fortunately broke up with me before they could further manifest. I would characterize my actions as mostly jealousy-driven. I would get upset when Faye would talk to other guys and would try to convince her to spend less time with certain people. I felt very lonely growing up and believed I had an unusually hard time making friends. I felt that other people had established friend circles and that mine would leave me any minute. So when I got a girlfriend and saw my opportunity to have someone to talk to all of the time, I was anxious about losing it. I did not care how she felt, as long as I had her to talk to. But I believe Faye saw past my yearning to be loved and realised that I wanted to use her to feel loved. She broke up with me. It could have ended there, but my motivations to have someone by my side, someone I could not lose, who would not walk away from me, instead lay dormant until I met Gina. I met Gina in one of those movie scenarios, like while waiting in line for coffee. We had and continue to have no mutual friends. This should be a red flag, and actually was quite different from how I met Faye, a long-term friendship that evolved into a relationship. When I started dating Gina, everything moved very quickly. We were physically extremely attracted to each other and would even have sex in public places. I remember telling her, probably within the first month, that I was only dating to get married, that I believed in commitment, and that as we got to know one another, we could see if we were headed in that direction. She was freaked out, but I believe she also felt lonely, and we very quickly went from dating a couple days a week to spending every possible waking moment with each other, texting non-stop, multiple hour-long phone calls, midnight rendezvous, etc. I had found what I wanted, and I was never going to lose it, if it cost me everything else. I went all in, ghosted all of my friends, stopped talking to my family. I was going to have Gina be my single emotional outlet. The thing was, in the beginning at least, she displayed a lot of jealous tendencies as well, chiding me not to talk to other girls and getting suspicious if it seemed I was getting distant. So I responded in kind. Part of the relationship became long distance, and we would video chat an unhealthy amount. I would want to keep her there in front of the lens so that she could not see friends or family. I asked her to swear off social media. I asked her not to go to events. At this point, she reciprocated, and as unreasonable and controlling as I was, she would do the same, probing into any girls I was talking to and demanding that I skip events to chat with her. I had no reason to believe what I was doing was wrong, and was simply stoked that a lonely guy like me had found a girl seemingly infatuated with him. A few months in, she moved in with me. She had been living with her parents, and her mum insisted we have a meeting, all three of us, before the move-in. We convinced her that we knew what we were doing. At this point, I believed I was close to winning. In my mind, we would live together for at least a year and then get married to seal the deal. I was unstoppable. Outside of this relationship with Gina, beside my increased distancing from my parents, a source of financial stability to me and nothing more, which led to many arguments and frustration, everything else in my life was looking great. I was lauded in my job and had excelled in my studies. I did not realise how emotionally unhealthy I was, or how destructive I was to Gina. Somehow, being with Gina nearly 24/7 was not enough for me. When she wanted to go get a new job, I would try and convince her not to, saying I would take care of our needs. I would be the provider. How noble I thought I was. When she ended up starting a new job at the insistence of her mother, I hid her keys so she would miss work. It did not stop there. I would make fun of her intelligence and belittle her for where she was in life. Anything that made me feel superior, I would make sure she knew it and told her how much she depended on me. I cannot pinpoint when it started, but I also would hit her when I was particularly angry at her. Not to make light of this physical abuse, but for the sake of clarity, it was never so intense that she would bruise. Evil of me that I did it at all, but no physical trace. This was not to cover my tracks. I was capable of being terrible, but even I had a limit. And, in a weird way, I still believed I loved Gina, and this stayed my hand. One day I came home and Gina was gone without a trace. She had blocked my number and moved all of her things out. I immediately knew why, and knew I had to fix it. I knew she would go back to her parents' house. I believed I could convince her to take me back if I promised to treat her better. And so that's exactly what I did. It started with getting her to agree to meet me in public. I knew she still had feelings for me. We went back to dating, and whenever I felt she was going to change her mind, I came up with a new tactic to get to her. I would buy her extravagant presents and agree to hang out with her and other people. Slowly but surely, I was able to start controlling her again. Except this time around, I was a lot more subtle. I would give her more space. I would romance her to get her to spend more time with me. I would slowly convince her to believe that certain people were not good to be around with, to the point that she would actually stop seeing them as much. Or, if I thought she had the time to spend with a friend, I would surprise her with dinners and activities I knew she would not want to miss. I had also promised not to hit her, and I stuck with this promise up until the time I punched her arm and she broke up with me. Our brief time apart, from my perspective, as within 3 or so days of her blocking my number I had managed to get a hold of her again, and so by seeing her at all I considered us together, though she would not consider us dating for months afterwards, was not brought up, and within a year our relationship looked healthier on the surface. I allowed her to have friends, as long as they were girls, and I would give her more and more free space. I decided to be more sociable as well. My new job at the time involved a lot of travel, and we spent more and more time apart. I believe I matured in some ways during this time, but my original motivation still remained. I had to secure this relationship for an even longer term, for life. The close call of losing Gina, even temporarily, had made me cautious, and while I had promised to treat her better this time around, I still wanted the same thing, to own her and never let her go again. I proposed to her and she said yes, but before long I realised that while she did still like me, she still was wary and would not sign herself away so imprudently. So while she wore the ring on her finger, wedding plans were never discussed. I only told my parents I was engaged casually one day while having a family dinner. Again, we had no mutual friends. This was an agreement solely between the two of us. I would complain about this from time to time, asking when she would finally be ready to legally get married, but a date was never set. One day, in a particularly heated argument, I hit her in the arm. I knew I had screwed up at that time, but nothing came of it, at least not immediately. I went out of town for work a couple weeks later. We had an argument over the phone about how she wanted to spend the weekend with her parents and I wanted to be with her. I was out of town and I had priority. She sent me a text saying to never talk to her again. I was losing her again, but it was different than the first time. This time felt different. It was like a veil had been lifted from over my eyes. I no longer cared about controlling her. I had been silly, I thought to myself. She had already shown me 1,000,000 times over that she wanted to be with me. All I had done was drive her away. With new resolve, I booked an early flight home, but it was already too late. I will remember this day for the rest of my life. I had booked an early morning flight so that I could go to her parents' house while I was sure she would be there. My plan was to apologize and make things right, but the universe was not on my side. Through a series of flight cancellations and delays, I did not arrive until late afternoon. When I got to her parents' house, only her dad was home. He said Gina was out with her mum, and I could wait outside the house until they came back. Gina's dad had a particular hatred for me. While I was waiting, a police car showed up. For me. The police officer handed me a restraining order and drove me away from the house. Gina had gone to court to file the restraining order that same afternoon. She and her mum had been on the way home when her dad called and told her I was waiting for her. This is why the police car had come for me. Her dad had no idea she was filing a restraining order. He was just informing her I was waiting at the house. This tipped her off, and so they waited for the police to escort me away before coming home. I wish the story had ended there, but there is a little more to tell. I saw Gina at court a week later and begged her not to go through with it, but she had made up her mind. I even tried to convince the judge that the order was invalid. I would have done anything to change things. Gina still had feelings for me. While she never got back together with me, she did selectively allow me to see her about once a week. The restraining order was protection for her. It kept me on a leash. I learned during this time how much she had resented me. She knew how much I wanted to get back together with her, and so she would tantalize me by saying she would reconsider if I did favors for her. I would continue to cook meals, buy presents, and run errands. I would do anything just to believe I had a chance. After a few months of this, I knew I could not go on like this. I told her I would never see her again and asked to see her one last time. We went on one of her favourite dates from when we were still together, and then I drove away and never looked back. This all happened a few years ago by now. I have never forgotten her, although the memories have faded. I used to selectively remember only what I believed were the good things, but I have since tried to reflect on the relationship more holistically and critically. It was after we had broken up, during the restraining order period, that she shared with me that we had been in a characteristically abusive relationship. I told her I was going to change, and she told me that people never change. It is this last thought that has stuck with me since. Can people actually change? I have read a lot of stories on Reddit of other posters' villains. Comments always include sentiments about wishing the most fitting punishments for these individuals because there are no second chances, right? I have not been in any long-term relationships since. I have been through many one-night stands, the occasional fling, and a lot of first dates that have gone absolutely nowhere. I want to believe that I can have a healthy relationship in the future, but am unsure if it is safe to do so. Perhaps I am, and always will be, a villain. And there we have our 3 shocking confessions from Reddit users. What do you think of the stories you've just heard? I personally am a big believer of the fact we can never truly understand a situation unless we're immediately involved in it. Nobody knows someone else's mind or how it works, or what's going on behind closed doors for that matter. I'd love to know your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. As always, we're always looking for new content, so submit your stories on our subreddit. Links are provided below. If you've not already done so, make sure to subscribe and remember to ding that bell to receive notifications so you never miss a moment with me. For now, however, JJ out.